The Godzilla film franchise has seen its fair share of absurd and outlandish ideas, with some making it onto the big screen, while others remain on the cutting room floor. During a recent video covering the demon beast Bagan, I briefly mentioned several other unused concepts that were pitched to Toho throughout the years. One of those was Godzilla potentially having his own bride. By picturing that alone, you may believe this is a fairly ridiculous proposal, but what if I were to tell you that this is just the tip of the iceberg and a lot of the fantastical elements that we see as commonplace now within the Godzilla series could have appeared sooner because of the screenplay? Crazy, I know, but how close did this all come together? Today, we'll be taking a look at the submitted screenplay that was tentatively titled Bride of Godzilla. In the year 1955, following the release of Godzilla Raids Again, Toho decided to place Godzilla on the back burner and focus more on other upcoming film projects. But that didn't stop actor Hideo Unagami, who was looking to gain traction as a screenwriter. Unagami spent a good portion of his career as a theater actor, but he also had a short stint as an on-screen performer at the film studio Shochiku. If they sound familiar, it's because they are the same company responsible for producing movies such as The X from Outer Space and Monster X Strikes Back. They were also the ones behind the creation of the lost 1933 Japanese King Kong film. Eventually, Unagami left Shochiku to try and start up his own theater company, which didn't last very long due to financial troubles. Following this, whilst recovering from stomach ulcers, he would send in a story to Toho he wrote called Life Away from People. Although it ended up being unused by the company, this did lead to him joining Toho's theater division in 1953. He also had several small roles in other Toho film productions such as Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai. Unagami would continue to write story outlines for potential movies during his acting tenure, with many of them never seeing the light of day. His most notable writing credit for Toho was for 1958's The H-Man, directed by Hishiro Honda. Unagami voluntarily wrote a screenplay for a potential third Godzilla film that would have been a direct sequel to the previous installment. His proposal was simply titled Bride of Godzilla? The story would have taken place right after the previous film, Godzilla Raids Again, and revolved around the character of Dr. Zenji Shida, a scientist who hypothesizes that prehistoric creatures like Godzilla and Anguirus resided inside caverns located within the Hollow Earth before making their way to the planet's surface. This is similar to what Dr. Yamane already believed about Godzilla in the original film, minus the whole Hollow Earth theory. Dr. Shida is also shown to have made two robotic creations. The first is named Eve. It is modeled after a female human being with an artificial brain, while the other is constructed not too long after Godzilla unthaws and escapes from its icy tomb. It's a giant-sized robot with a humanoid shape simply called the Bride of Godzilla, whose main purpose is to take down the king of the monsters. The robot is also described as having a somewhat naked appearance. Yeah, I'm not even going to bother with that one. Along the way, we are introduced to Shida's brother Yoshi, no, not that one, who supervises a mining corporation near Kyushu. A large bloodthirsty flea appears from the mines and brings harm to a village nearby, but it is brought down by a team led by Yoshi. Shortly after, a former colleague of Shida's named Dr. Yanai is brought in to examine the corpse of the oversized bug. It's here we learn that Yanai has a wife by the name of Riko, who Shida supposedly designed his robot Eve after. This information comes from a reporter who attended a speech Dr. Shida held before this event, where he presented all the information mentioned earlier on. Yanai believes that Dr. Shida is toying with God by creating these robots, due to his beliefs in Christianity. This discovery leads to Riko visiting Dr. Shida's laboratory, where she meets what is essentially her metallic doppelganger. Well, that isn't unsettling in the slightest. Dr. Shida even showcases to her a robot foster daughter also named Riko. I think it's safe to say that Shida may have an unhealthy obsession with this woman. Back in Kyushu, a group of miners stumble upon an underground opening of Godzilla and Anguirus' lair, a whole new world drenched in an orange-tinted sky with a vast amount of mountains, lakes, and deserts. They encounter many different creatures whilst exploring the newly found terrain. Examples include a giant bat, a family of mermaids, Godzilla, Anguirus, and another giant flea hitching a ride on Anguirus. The crew soon escape and deliver the news of their findings to Yoshi, who calls upon his brother Dr. Shida to investigate the situation. However, an earthquake causes the previous entrance to be blocked off, thus leaving everyone involved to have to begin searching for another way in. Mermaids are soon spotted following this, giving everyone hope that there may be a second entryway. Dr. Shida commandeers a boat via government approval and alongside his foster daughter Riko, eventually discovers the underwater entrance in question, but not without witnessing a group of mermaids battling a giant octopus. Riko follows the mermaids in and manages to befriend them. While observing the Hollow Earth, she is approached by none other than Godzilla. Riko attempts to be friendly with the nuclear leviathan, but in return, Godzilla strikes the cliffside she's standing on, causing her to plummet into the water below. A female mermaid manages to rescue her and brings Riko back to where Dr. Shida is, while avoiding a sea serpent in the process. It's at this moment that Dr. Shida decides to activate his giant robot daughter to finally defeat Godzilla once and for all. A power plant is then used to charge up the bride of Godzilla before the final confrontation, but in the wake of this, Godzilla emerges in Kyushu. Other giant creatures soon follow, such as Anguirus, a giant chameleon, and an Archaeopteryx. In response, the Japanese Special Defense Forces deploy fighter jets to try and ward off the monsters while Dr. Zenji Shida transfers the memories of Riko into the bride and also places an H-bomb inside of the robot. Godzilla's destruction ultimately leads it towards a church where Dr. Yanai and others are sheltered, but this ends up backfiring on them and Godzilla completely decimates it, taking the lives of everyone who is hunkered inside, except for Riko Yanai, who manages to flee the scene. The fighter jets continue their assault and actually manage to defeat the giant chameleon, but are no match for Godzilla and the Archaeopteryx. Fortunately, enough time passes for the bride to fully activate, and she then springs into action. The giant robot lays the smackdown on Anguirus, who is soon defeated. The bride then delivers the final blow by breaking apart his jaw and then tearing out his throat. Sheesh! What a gruesome fate. Anguirus just can't seem to catch a break, it seems. Godzilla fires its atomic breath at the bride, but it doesn't even seem to faze her. This somehow gains Godzilla's affection as he assists in helping the robot bride in executing the Archaeopteryx. She proceeds to snap the dino bird's neck while Godzilla sets its corpse ablaze. Godzilla and the Robo Bride then end up wrestling their way under the sea, where Godzilla creates another entrance to the Hollow Earth cavern with its atomic breath. Dr. Shida insists that a wedding of sorts is set to occur, with his reasoning being, and I quote, "It is the foreplay of love to be beaten." The two would then embrace inside the cavern just as the bride of Godzilla would detonate the hydrogen bomb that Zenji Shida implanted within her earlier on, thus completely eradicating the remnants of the newly discovered world. Dr. Shida tries to make up with the now widowed Riko, but she rejects his attempts at reconciling, and really, who can blame her? His previous behavior alone would give me the creeps too. The conclusion of the story would then show the mermaid family resurfacing and unintentionally startling a member of the military on the boat, causing them to open fire on the aquatic kinfolk, tragically taking the life of the mermaid child in the process. A very dark and somber ending to what I can best describe as an off-the-rails plotline. With the completion of Bride of Godzilla's script, Hideo Unagami ended up turning it into then Toho president Iwao Mori, who would then hand it over to producer Tomoyuki Tanaka. Tanaka must have had a real fondness for the treatment, because 3 separate drafts were made for this initial version of the script, but Bride of Godzilla never made its way onto the big screen. And like many other cancelled Toho film projects, it seems to have all come down to one big reason: budgetary restraints! I'm sure just by hearing my little synopsis, you can tell just how overtly ambitious this idea was, especially for a film that would have been made in the mid to late 50s. Those elaborate sets, underwater sequences, and robust monster action, all with colored photography in mind, would have cost Toho a fortune. But despite the treatment being rejected then, Tanaka brought up this proposal once more many years down the road during the 9-year gap between Terror of Mechagodzilla and The Return of Godzilla. During that period, Tanaka was still trying to find a way to bring Godzilla back to cinema screens across Japan, and one of those thoughts came from Bride of Godzilla. In 1978, he approached screenwriter Hideki Nagahara to do a few rewrites to the previous script, with a lot of the alterations being pretty drastic from what was summarized before. The Hollow Earth setting was missing from these and instead replaced with a remote island. The robotic bride was also reworked into something else entirely, once as a female Mechagodzilla of sorts piloted by Dr. Shida himself, and the other being just another female member of Godzilla's species. It does feel more believable that Godzilla would be attracted to that rather than a giant humanoid robot. Speaking of Dr. Shida, his role was still present in the first couple of drafts by Nagahara before ultimately being removed entirely along with pretty much all the other cast of characters present within the 1955 pitch. That includes all of the kaiju who were present beforehand, with the exception of the enormous blood-sucking flea. The mermaids remained a constant even with each script revision, but their roles were significantly minimized from what was seen in Unagami's outline. The finale always remained consistent. Godzilla and his female companion would be blown up by a nuclear bomb. However, even with all those changes that were made, Hideki Nagahara still felt dissatisfied with all of them. He instead decided to put all of his writing efforts into another story concept titled Resurrection of Godzilla. That outline would eventually be reworked and turned into 1984's The Return of Godzilla. It probably goes without saying that Bride of Godzilla was never made into a motion picture, which really makes you wonder what could have been with the technology at the time. Unfortunately, the aspiring screenwriter Hideo Unagami would pass away from a heart attack in 1957 and would have never seen just how much mileage this concept of his could have had. But what's neat about all this is that elements from his various Bride of Godzilla drafts did find their way into other Toho projects, whether it be intentional or not. One of the prime examples is 1956's Rodan, which has an entire plotline revolving around coal miners dealing with a giant insect in a village located in Kyushu before being upstaged by another colossal flying monster. That alone sounds like it was pulled from Unagami's work, except the insect in question wound up being the Meganulon. We wouldn't see any kind of huge blood-sucking flea until nearly 30 years later with the Shockirus in The Return of Godzilla, which was also written by Nagahara after his initial attempts to rewrite The Bride of Godzilla.
Coincidence? I think not!
Also, many of the early concept arts for Rodan depict the creature as an Archaeopteryx like one of the proposed creatures discovered in the Hollow Earth caverns. The similarities to Bride of Godzilla kind of become hard to ignore when you take these factoids into account. Let's not forget that the Hollow Earth setting plays a huge role in the Monsterverse currently, and that could have been established way earlier on with Unagami's screenplay. At least it's nice to know that Hideo Unagami's creative influence lived on in some capacity. Although, this begs the question, could The Bride of Godzilla have worked? Well, let's look at the timeline. With the more grounded tone that was already established between the original Godzilla and its sequel, Godzilla Raids Again, it would have been a huge shift for the series back in the 50s. Toho could have potentially jumped the shark faster than the Monsterverse has.
They love me.
But really, who knows how general audiences would have perceived it. They did enjoy King Kong vs. Godzilla when it made its way into cinemas, and even that idea was treated as absurd. But it also went on to become one of the most attended Godzilla films in Japanese cinemas for years to come. So maybe it could have worked then, but perhaps not in the overseas markets with the more religious aspects that were present in the original script. It's also theorized special effects director E.G. Tsuburaya may have not approved of how Yanai's character was disposed of in the original treatment, due to his Roman Catholic background. Also, a giant naked robot would have been present throughout most of the film. Need I say more? As for the 70s, anything was possible, but it's clear that nobody other than Tanaka himself truly thought much of the idea. He liked it so much that supposedly following his death in 1997, the script for Bride of Godzilla was found in one of his desk drawers. Now, times have changed a bit, and maybe this is a concept that could work well in a future Godzilla film. After all, it's not like it would be the first time a famous movie monster would find himself a love interest. Although it would be a first for Godzilla, at least on the big screen. I mean, who wouldn't want to be with this handsome bastard? There was a promotional song by Masato Shimon called Bride of Godzilla, released in conjunction with the 1972 re-release of Ebirah Horror of the Deep. But the only actual occurrences of Godzilla having some kind of significant other that come to mind are the Dr. Pepper commercials from 1985 with Newzilla, the girlfriend Gojira from the Game Boy game Gojira-kun, and even Godzilla the series if you want to include that. There is one ship some people like to get behind, but I, however, would rather throw myself overboard. As stated before, the Godzilla franchise has seen its fair share of wacky ideas, many of which have made their way into official projects approved by Toho, so the idea of a bride doesn't seem too far out there anymore. Godzilla's had an adopted son, for crying out loud. Yet, is this something people are actually clamoring to see? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Should The Bride of Godzilla ever be made into a feature-length film, or be left on the cutting room floor? Personally, I'm in no rush to see it come to fruition. I've always found myself more invested in the somewhat grounded stories that the Godzilla series has to offer, so naturally that's my preference. Having said that, I'm all for the fun, endearing, and lighthearted entries as well, and maybe there's a place for that idea to prosper in that category. Just, maybe don't get too carried away with it. I did, however, learn something from all this research though. Godzilla and I have a lot more in common than I first thought. Two things, in fact. We both have yet to find our brides-to-be, and we have also both met our demise on numerous occasions. Fortunately, I've only experienced the latter of the two on an emotional scale. I have a clean bill of health, and won't be reaching the afterlife anytime.